everybody! Welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Every year I like to create a new crocheted little gift topper for everybody on my Christmas list. This is something that I make and everyone gets the same thing, but usually in their own special colors on top of their gifts. So I kind of use it in lieu of tags with the actual person's name on it. This year I've decided to make cute little granny square Christmas trees. I call them granny square Christmas trees because it's the granny square pattern. So it's done with shells and simple corners, kind of like the granny square, but it's turned into a Christmas tree pattern. We're going to make these today on the show. They're really simple. They're a great way to use up your scraps. And if you've got some of that pretty little Christmas yarn lying around, this is a really good use for it. You don't need to decorate them afterwards if you use the Christmas yarn because the tinsel runs through it. So that is what we're going to make on the show today. And after you've done one, I dare you to stop. These are so much fun, totally addictive, and in large groups, they're so cute. They make great little tree ornaments, they make really cute swag or bunting, and like I said, I'm using them for gift toppers this year. So that's what we're doing today. So grab your hooks, grab your Christmas yarn, and let's go to the craft table and get crafty. In order to make our little granny Christmas trees, you need some Christmas looking yarn. So that's this sort of stuff that's got this little bit of sparkle running through it. This is a cotton blend that I bought, and this one's acrylic, so you can use either or. This one, plus 8 other little Christmas trees, came out of a 50-gram ball, and I had a wee little bit left over. And this is a 100-gram ball, so with that in mind, I should be able to get 18 to 20 Christmas trees out of a 100-gram ball. I'm using a 4.25 millimeter hook, or AG6, because this is a size 4 yarn that we're using. It's a worsted weight, and you need a yarn needle, and a pair of scissors, and maybe even a contrasting bit of yarn or ribbon to create a tie off the top of your little tree, so you have something to hang it with. And once you've got all that, we can get started. In order to make our granny Christmas trees, we need to start in the middle. So you grab your yarn and start with a slip knot. Now we're going to chain 4 because we want to make a small loop with which to work into. So I chose 4 because I felt that it was going to create a ring, so a ring or a loop, that was big enough to work into without being too large. So there's my 4 chains. It's a little tricky to see with that extra bit of tinsel running through it, so make sure that you take the time to count as you go. Take your hook and join your last stitch, or your last chain, with the first one by slip stitching through both. So here's what I mean. You want to create a very small ring. So something you can just barely get the tip of your finger into. You don't want a big ring because it will make it very difficult for your tree to lay flat. And here we go. We're going to chain 3 to begin because this is primarily done using the double crochet stitch. Once you've chained 3, and remember this counts as a double crochet, we're going to double crochet into the ring. So through the ring, not through the stitches. We're going to wrap our yarn, go through the ring, grab the yarn and pull up a loop. 1, 2, 3 loops on our hook. I'm going to try and keep my little tail out of the way here. Wrap your yarn and pull back through the first 2 loops. And watch that tinsel because it's going to try and split up on you. Wrap and go through the last 2 loops. And there's your double crochet. We're going to do 1 more double crochet to complete this shell, and in this case each shell consists of 3 double crochets, and remember your chain 3 counts as a double crochet. So that's shell number 1. We're going to chain 2 because we need to create a corner. So chain 2, and now we're going to put another shell into the same ring, and a shell is 3 double crochets. So we're going to double crochet 3 times back into the same ring, Oops. So there's shell number 1, a corner of 2 chains, shell number 2, and try to make sure that those 2 shells take up 2/3 of your ring space. So you've got about 1/3 of space left across the top. You want this to lay flat when it lies on your workspace. We're going to create another corner, so we're going to chain 2. And because a triangle has 3 sides, we're going to work one more shell into that ring. And a shell is 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. There we go. Shell number 1, corner of chain 2, shell number 2, corner of chain 2, shell number 3, and in order to finish, we need to put in our last corner, and that's 2 chains. 1, 2, and we're going to join with a slip stitch to the top of this chain 3. So you find your chain 3 that you began your first row with. 1, 2, 3. There's the top. Take your hook, put it right through the top of that chain. You can use either the top loop or the bottom loop. Just grab a piece of it and slip stitch. Now here's the important part. You're probably going to find that it wants to poof up a little bit. This is where you take a moment and you pull gently on all of your corners. You can lay it flat and stick your fingers in each of those corner spaces and just pull into a gentle triangle. Keep it nice and loose. You don't want it to be too tight. If you've gotten to the end of your first row and it is really, really tight, then I recommend you upsize your hook. So take it out, start again, and use a much bigger hook. The idea is to have a nice flattening first row because you want this to lay flat. See how this one lays flat? And I haven't even blocked this one yet actually. I just used the heat of my hand. So you want to make sure your first row looks like this and lays pretty much flat. Here comes the tricky part. We want all of our stitches to remain on the right side of our Christmas tree. So we are going to slip stitch across the top of that first shell we made into the next chain 2 space. So you identify the top of the next double crochet and you're going to loosely slip stitch into it. And I say loosely because you don't want to pull this any tighter than it already is. Identify the next double crochet and slip stitch loosely into that one. And when I say loosely, I mean try to keep your loops a little on the slack side so that you can kind of pull up on them a little. And that will keep that little bit of give you need in your first row going. Now we're going to slip stitch into that first chain 2 corner. So right through the whole space and just slip stitch nice and loosely. Don't worry, you won't even notice these once you're all finished. So as long as you're still laying flat, we're good to go for row 2. Row 2 begins the same as row 3. We have, or I should say row 1, we have to chain 3 to begin. Our chain 3 counts as a double crochet and it brings us up to the right height. We're going to finish our first shell into this chain 2 space. So you double crochet twice more, into that same space. Now, we are making 3 more corners. Technically, in our first row, our corners consisted of sort of this little chain 2 that we put in between our shells. But in our second row, and if any of you have done the crochet granny square with me, you know that once you get to your second row, a corner consists of a shell, 2 chains, and another shell all into that same corner space. So we're going to work 3 more double crochets into that same space to complete a second shell. So our first corner of our second row will consist of shell, chain 2, shell. Shell, chain, chain, shell. Shell, chain, chain, shell. That is a corner. Now the next space we're going to work into is the next corner. But in order to get there, we need to create a little bit of give room between our two shells. So we're going to chain 1, just 1. 1 chain is a nice spacer along a side. Here is the finished tree. If you can tell, there's the 3 shells that make up our first row. That's the center of the tree. Each corner has shell, chain, chain, shell. Shell, chain, chain, shell. Shell, chain, chain, shell. But in between, that create these nice side pieces, you want 1 spacer chain. So shell, chain, chain, shell, chain. Shell, chain, chain, shell, chain. And that's how we're going to go around for row 2. So we've completed our first corner. Shell, chain, chain, shell, chain. That's our spacer. We're going to work everything into the next space. So what's a corner? Shell, chain, chain, shell. And what's a shell? A shell is 3 double crochets. You'll be doing this in your sleep. There's 3 double crochets. That works out to a shell. So that's the first shell of my second corner. Chain 2, that completes my corner piece, and then 1 more shell into the same space, and that's my whole corner. 1, 2, 3. We're on a side, so we're going to chain 1, and then we are going to work our last corner into our last chain 2 space from the previous row. Here's another thing I need you guys to stop and do. Grab the 2 corners that you've just completed and pull on them. You want to make sure that you continue to keep your work nice and loose. You can block it with a steam iron afterwards if you find that everything's a bit tight, but it's really good to kind of yank on things as you go. It helps pull it into the right shape. It also helps all of your stitches sort of stretch out a little bit, and it keeps that slackness that you need. So try to remember not to be too tight, and if you find that you're having a lot of trouble, just get a bigger needle, or a bigger hook I should say, because that will help make for larger size stitches, and the larger stitches will have a little more give to them. We're going to work our last corner now into that top or last chain 2 space, and that is shell, chain, chain, shell. Each shell is 3 double crochets. There's 2. And 3. Chain 2. Try to make sure that your chains are nice and loose and large. They're not tight little tiny chains. You want nice loose ones. Work your last 3 double crochets or your last shell all into that same chain 2 space. And once you're finished, remember you've got to put in 1 last spacer chain before you join to the top of your first shell. That is a chain 3. That's what began our row 3. Make sure you have your spacer chain there, and then identify the top of that chain 3. Slip your hook into it and slip stitch. Nice and loose, nice and relaxed. Then you lay it flat. Identify all 3 corners, so not the spacers on the side, but your 3 corners, and pull it. Give it a nice stretch. Give all 3 corners a nice stretch, and make sure that it lies flat. You can puff up a little bit or curl a little bit, that's fine, because you can always go in and steam block it with an iron. But just try to make sure that it looks like a triangle and that it lays mostly flat on your work surface. And that is the granny part of this little tree all complete. All we have to do now is put on the border. So this Christmas tree has a sweet little single crochet border all the way around. And we're going to do that right now. Single crochet. It's a shorter stitch. So in order to begin row 3, we need to chain 1. We're going to chain 1. And into that same stitch, so the same top of that chain 3 that we joined in, we're going to single crochet. So take your hook, go right through that same sort of strangely bisected stitch, and single crochet. You should have 2 double crochets left in that shell, and you want to make sure you get a single crochet into the top of each of them. This might be the sort of confusing bit of row 3, so just make sure you get a single crochet into the top of each of those 3 pieces. It should look something like this. So you joined, chained 1, and single crocheted into the same stitch, which is technically the top of that chain 3. Then you single crocheted into each of the next 2 stitches. Now we're at our first corner. This is going to be a little different than our regular corner. So we're going to single crochet twice. 1, 2 into that same corner. And instead of chaining 2, we're only going to chain 1. Why? Well, we're using a smaller stitch. It's our last row. It's still going to give us a nice little angle, but we don't want a whole lot of spaces. And I'll show you what I mean. See how each corner has a nice tight little angle? You can kind of grab it with your fingers and pinch it. But there's no real space showing between any of the stitches. It looks like a nice solid band. Well, that is what putting 2 single crochet, chain 1, 2 single crochet into each corner stitch is going to do for you. So we've put 2 single crochet, chain 1, 2 single crochet into that first corner space. See that? Nice and solid looking, and there's even a little bit of a corner. That's what the chain 1 does for us. Now you're going to work each stitch down the side. So make sure you pull back a little bit to get that first stitch. You want to work that first stitch of your first shell down your second side. Single crochet into the top of each one. And when you get to your first spacer, so this is the chain 1 space that we put along the sides, you can just single crochet right into the middle of it. You don't have to split a stitch. You can if you like, but I don't bother. Work a single crochet into each of the next 3 double crochets, or the next entire shell. And that brings us up to another corner. The corner is 2 single crochets, 1, 2, chain 1, and 2 more single crochets, 1, 2. Then you're going to single crochet all the way down this side, work your last corner, and then we're going to finish off the bottom with a slip stitch to join our last single crochet and our first single crochet. Alright, we're just nearing the beginning of our third row. Don't forget to single crochet into that last spacer space. Get to the end, find that first single crochet you made, don't confuse it with the chain 1, and slip stitch. Now this is very important. You should be on the far side of your bottom middle space. So here's your 2 corners, here's your top corner. You should have slip stitch to join on this one side of your bottom space. So if you're right-handed like me, it'll be on the left side. If you're left-handed, it'll be on the right. But you want to be on one side or the other of your bottom middle space. That is the whole tree. Now, lay it flat, do the same thing, grab your little corner pieces. You might want to actually grab by the very edge of the corner. Pull it out. You want to make sure you continue to encourage your crochet to go into the shape that you want. If your hands are nice and hot and possibly even a little damp from crocheting, lay it on top of your work for just a few seconds, and the heat and the sort of this bit of the steam that's generated from your palm of your hand will also help to lay it flat. This works especially well if you're using cotton. Now all we have to do is make this cute little tree trunk. So we grab our yarn and our hook. You should be on one side or the other of your bottom space. Chain 1 and flip. Now you're looking at the back of your tree. you're going to single crochet into that same place, so that same stitch that you joined in, single crochet, and single crochet into the next 2. There we go. Chain 1, flip, so now we're looking at the front of our tree again, and single crochet into each of those 3 stitches. 1, 2, and 3. And that is it! Snip your yarn. You don't need very much tail. Fasten off. Grab your yarn needle and weave in your tail. I just weave mine across the back through a few of those stitches. And then all you need now is a little bit of yarn or possibly some ribbon, and you can just loop it through the very top chain 1 space, as you can see there. Tie it in there, or if you're using a hook, that's fine too. And that's it. That's all you need to do in order to make this super cute little Christmas tree. All made in one piece. Pretty easy, right? And there you go, one granny square Christmas tree, all ready for your gifts, your Christmas trees, or even a sweet little holiday bunting around the house. Thank you so much for tuning in today, everybody. We really appreciate it when you pop in and say hello, so make sure you leave a comment in the comment boxes down below to say hi. Also, if you want to pop over to our website, make sure you check it out. We're always updating our tools page, our blog page, and even sometimes our free patterns page, and there's lots of fun to be had over at www.jaydainstitches.com. You can also follow me on Pinterest, Google+, and Instagram. I'm at JaydaInStitches, and I'd love to see your pictures of all the nifty little things you've been making. So please make sure you pop in and share everything with me. That is it for this week. We will see you again very soon on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and be crafty. See you later. Bye!